Hi guys, my name is Josh Majestic and welcome to another MrBallen video. In today's video we're going to be reacting to the Stray Cat King Historical Legends Part 5. This was a suggestion video as always. It's 14 minutes long, so make sure you have your water with you. Water is very important. And yeah, as always guys, if you enjoy this, consider giving me a like, subscribing, it's free. And if you have any suggestions of any videos you'd like me to watch, or any video games you'd like me to play, go down in my comments below, leave me the title, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Now, without further ado, roll the intro. Hi, welcome. Without further ado, let's begin.
Absurd this story gets. Remember, it's true. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange... No matter how absurd this story gets, remember, it's true. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and lightly toast all of their bread and then put it back in the bag. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss our weekly uploads.
Why?
Alright, let's get into today's story.
Oh, I went down. I meant to come back up. Come back up.
In the winter of 1748, Timothy Dexter was born in a town just north of Boston, Massachusetts called Malden. Despite being incredibly dim-witted, Timothy always believed he was going to strike it rich one day.
All right.
But looking around at his family, who were a bunch of poor farm laborers, Timothy realized he would need to make some big moves if he wanted that dream to become a reality.
Yes,
when he was just 8 years old, he decided he would make the first of his many big moves. And this move was to drop out of 2nd grade and go to work on a farm and then on to a leather tannery. For years, he worked hard, earning more money than his family had ever made, but he knew this line of work was not going to make him rich. And so, when he was 19 years old, he decided it was time to make yet another big move. He sold his best suit and used the money to relocate farther north to another Massachusetts town called Newburyport. He believed with their booming economy, he was bound to make some additional money there. And he was right, but his payday would not come from a higher paying job. When he arrived there, he met a lonely, wealthy widow named Elizabeth Frothingham, and he promptly married her, becoming rich overnight. After moving into her mansion and dubbing himself Lord Timothy Dexter, he suddenly felt lost. He had spent his entire life pursuing wealth, and now that he suddenly had it, he didn't know what to do with it. And so he looked around Newburyport at the other rich people and saw what they were doing, and he found that many of them held political positions. And so Timothy decided he would run for office too. But unfortunately, the voters caught on to the fact that he was a 2nd grade dropout who couldn't read or write or think critically, so he didn't win the election. But instead of accepting his defeat, Timothy began petitioning the town to let him have his political office anyways. And the town said, no, that's not how democracy works. But Timothy didn't really understand, and he just continued to send these carefully outlined petitions explaining exactly why they needed to appoint him. The town had to bring in experts that were able to decipher what he wrote, because Timothy was deeply illiterate, and his petitions were so riddled with spelling mistakes and were so confusing that at first glance it looked like it was written in a foreign language. After they deciphered them, they would immediately deny them, but Timothy just continued to send them. And so finally the town got so fed up with all of his petitions that they decided they would just give him a fake political title just to get him to stop and to low-key humiliate him. They offered him the title of the Informer of Deer, and they told him his job was to look high and low all over Newburyport for any signs of deer activity. And the joke was, in Newburyport, there are no deer. But Timothy did not find this humiliating. He did not see the joke in it. He took it very seriously and believed his petitions had worked. And so he took his political title and with great enthusiasm, he got to work, spending all hours running all around the town, carefully documenting all Deer activity, of which there was none. At the end of his term, Timothy felt like he had accomplished a lot as the informer of Deer and was ready to move on from political office. And so he turned in his official Informer of Deer logbook to the town and told them they should pass it along to the next Informer of Deer to get them up to speed. Unfortunately, when the town opened that logbook, they found it contained only crude pictures of deer and then illiterate ramblings about deer that were so difficult to decipher that even the experts weren't able to do it. And so the logbook was thrown away, and the Informer of Deer position was never filled again. Shortly after the American Revolutionary War broke out between the colonies in America and Great Britain, America began printing their own money to pay for their troops. But this money, called the Continental Dollar, it wasn't backed by silver or gold. It was just backed on the promise of future value if America won the war. That, combined with overprinting this money, led to rampant inflation, and very quickly the Continental Dollar was worthless. Some of the wealthy folk in Newburyport decided they would do the troops a favor, who were now destitute because they held all of this worthless currency. And these wealthy people offered to buy all of their Continental currency for a fraction of the price, which was better than nothing. When Timothy saw all these rich people doing that, he quickly jumped on the trend. But he didn't view this as doing a favor for these troops that needed the money. He viewed this as a great investment opportunity. He believed America was going to win this war and that eventually this currency was going to have lots of value.
Good for
and so
him.
he invested all of his savings into buying back the Continental Dollar. When word spread that Timothy had made this terrible investment, because at the time, nobody was predicting this currency would have any worth, really even if America won the war. When they found out that Timothy had made this ridiculous investment, his peers, the other wealthy folk in Newburyport, they were thrilled. They were so annoyed by Timothy, and they didn't like the fact that he was kind of on their level because he had some money. And so they were excited to see him go bankrupt. But sure enough, at the end of the American Revolution, when America won the war, Congress made good and backed the currency, making Timothy one of the richest people in America.
Let's go, man!
Right away, Timothy used his second big windfall of cash to purchase the most luxurious mansion in the richest neighborhood in all of Newburyport. But beyond that purchase, he didn't really know what to do with all of this money. It was very overwhelming. And so after several weeks of deep introspection where he tried to figure out, who he was now and what he wanted to be, it suddenly became clear to him. He needed to construct 40 wooden statues of random famous men on his front lawn. These statues included George Washington, Napoleon Bonaparte, Thomas Jefferson, and of course himself. The inscription under his statue read, "The first in the East, the first in the West, and the greatest philosopher in the Western world." After a sculptor was done, Timothy went out to inspect all 40 statues, and he discovered what he believed to be a huge discrepancy on one of them. Underneath Thomas Jefferson's replica, it said the author of the Declaration of Independence, which is accurate. But he told his sculptor that he was supposed to put down the author of the Constitution. And the sculptor very gently said, "That's not right. It should be the Declaration of Independence." Timothy became irate. He was not having it. And so he ran into his mansion and came out with his oversized hunting rifle and began firing at the sculptor's feet until he made the change. After Jefferson's title was fixed, Timothy noticed another discrepancy on another statue. He walked over to the George Washington replica.
He wants to give him all the praise, doesn't he?
Inscription which said George Washington. And Timothy just shook his head, got out a paintbrush, covered it up, and wrote one word: Pitt. Just Pitt. Because periodically Timothy would confuse George Washington's name with Pitt, and nobody could convince him otherwise.
What?
By now, the other wealthy folk in Newburyport had really grown to resent Timothy, and now he was just showing off his wealth with his totally ridiculous mansion and all of his statues. And so some of these aristocrats wanted to find a way to just ruin Timothy. And so knowing he was not a very bright man, they decided they would start giving him deliberately terrible investment tips. The first being that he should buy a whole bunch of warming pans and send them to the Caribbean. A warming pan is like this big frying pan that you load up with hot coals and you slide under your bed to stay warm at night. This works really well in a cold environment like Newburyport, but is completely worthless in a warm tropical environment like the Caribbean. But Timothy believed he was being given some great insider trading information and absolutely took this to the bank.
Oh no.
And he went and bought 2 ships and he loaded them up with 40,000 of these huge warming pans and he fired them off to the Caribbean. And when they got there, the locals didn't know what they were or what they were for, but they found these warming pans served as great ladles for molasses. And they all sold out for a huge profit.
Oh my
Timothy went to those aristocrats and he thanked them for their incredible investment tip. These rich people were furious that their plan had backfired, and so they decided they would pitch him another, even worse investment tip that was bound to ruin him. They told him, why don't you buy up a whole bunch of coal and send it to Newcastle, England? Newcastle being the coal capital of the world, where there was so much coal there was actually an expression at the time, that's like sending coal to Newcastle, which meant you're doing something completely pointless. But these fine rich folks had never done Timothy wrong, and so he took their advice and once again took it to the bank. He loaded up his ships with coal and he sent them off to Newcastle. And this would have ruined him had it not been for the coal workers' strike that occurred right before his shipment arrived. And so when Timothy's coal arrived on the shores of Newcastle, there was a coal shortage and all of his coal sold out for another huge profit. And so once again, Timothy went back to the aristocrats and said,
no way
thank
is
you
this
for
true?
the incredible advice. Now truly irate that their plan has backfired 2 times, these aristocrats got together and said, okay, we got to set him up for something that's going to make him fail. And so they pitched him one more terrible investment tip. This was, hey Timothy, why don't you go buy all the whalebone you possibly can? Just hoard it, keep it in your house, because someday it's going to get really valuable. At the time, whalebone was extremely expensive and losing its value every single day. But again, Timothy thinks these people have never done me wrong. I'm going to do just that. And so he went out and he collected thousands of pounds of these rotting whale bones and made a huge stockpile in his basement. And shortly after he had built up this mountain of bone, over in France, it became fashionable for men to wear corsets. And wouldn't you know it, these corsets were made out of whale bone. And so once again, Timothy's investment completely paid off. And so he tipped his hat for a 3rd time to these rich folks that just keep making him more and more money. After these 3 big investment wins, Timothy was very confident and he viewed himself as a shrewd investor. And so he began to believe that he could identify winning investments himself. And so the first winning investment that he identified was to purchase all these stray cats in Newburyport that were lined up for euthanization. Timothy figured these mangy, sick, feral animals would make great house pets in the Caribbean. And so he loaded them all onto his 2 ships, he fired them across the sea, and wouldn't you know it, they sold like hotcakes. Not because they were cute and cuddly, but because unbeknownst to Timothy, the Caribbean had a huge rat infestation problem in their warehouses. And so his shipment of stray cats arrived at the perfect time. At some point, after all these successful investments, Timothy started to wonder about his legacy. How would people remember him after he was gone? And so there was only one way to find out. Timothy, very elaborately, faked his own death. And as he hid, watching his funeral, he noticed his wife, Elizabeth, wasn't as sad as he thought she should be over the death of her husband. No. And so he leapt out in front of the thousands of people that were there and he began beating his wife with his cane. After this, Timothy decided he didn't really like his wife anymore, and so he decided he would just tell people she was dead, even though she was not dead. And so when people came to Timothy's mansion and they saw his wife walking around, clearly alive, Timothy would tell them, oh, she's a ghost. And because at this point Timothy was so wealthy and so influential, people just kind of accepted this and began viewing Elizabeth as a ghost. Before Timothy's actual death, he penned an autobiography called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, a title that to this day people still don't really understand. Inside the book were 24 pages of completely illiterate ramblings with absolutely 0 punctuation. The book was so terrible that it actually sold out very quickly because people thought it was funny to buy this book. After people criticized Timothy for not using any punctuation, Timothy printed a 2nd edition where at the very end he included a single page with 13 lines of just random punctuation marks with a note at the bottom that said, "Go ahead and sprinkle these in as you see fit." In 1806, just a few years after publishing his book, Lord Timothy Dexter, the informer of deer, quietly passed away.
Oh,
this
dude.
time for real. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's
This guy was real. This guy was real. Oh my god. No way, my guy. Like, seriously. This guy. He was like Forrest Gump before Forrest Gump existed. Oh my god. He just had the luck. He just had the luckiest luck. Like, the world was like, you know what? Here you go. And he took it and he just ran with it. You know, like... Oh, man. I don't even know how you could be like that. If he probably scratched the lottery, if he bought all the lottery tickets, I bet you he would have won and made money back somehow. Oh, dude. Through sheer determination and just living his life the way he wants, he got everything he wanted ever. I mean, besides his... I mean, he even had a wife. He had a wife. I mean, she wasn't really, obviously, faithful. Nor did she really care when he died. But... I mean, what a great life, man. Like, oh my god, I can't even with that story. Everybody... Stay strong, everyone. Stay safe. Wear your seatbelt, wear your helmet, wear your mask. Don't put the flashlight behind you. Don't look in the haunted mirrors. And as always, have a nice day. That was the best. That was the absolute best. Yeah!